Hello, and welcome back to Speak English Daily.
Hi, everyone. We are very happy to see you here today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're talking about something that almost every person has experienced at some point: awkward conversations. It doesn't matter how confident, friendly, or experienced you are. Sooner or later, you'll find yourself in a conversation that feels uncomfortable, confusing, or strangely tense. I think it's one of the most universal human experiences.
I agree. What's interesting is that awkward conversations happen to everyone, yet many people feel like they're the only ones who struggle with them. When an awkward moment happens, we often think everyone notices it and remembers it, but the truth is that most people have their own awkward moments to worry about.
That's such a good point. Sometimes we imagine that everyone around us is carefully analyzing what we say, but most people are focused on themselves. Still, awkward conversations can feel very powerful when we're in the middle of them. Even a few seconds of discomfort can seem much longer than it really is.
One thing I've always found fascinating is silence. A short pause in a conversation might only last 3 or 4 seconds, but it can feel much longer. Suddenly, people start wondering if they said something wrong or if the other person is bored. The silence itself isn't always a problem, but our reaction to it often creates the awkwardness.
That's true. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. You introduce yourself, exchange a few comments, and then both of you run out of things to say. Nobody knows what topic to bring up next. The silence arrives, and suddenly the conversation feels uncomfortable.
Another classic situation is forgetting someone's name. Maybe you've met the person several times before. Perhaps they've even remembered your name. Then they greet you warmly and your mind goes completely blank. You know you should know their name, but you can't remember it.
I think many people have experienced that. You start searching your memory while trying to look relaxed. Sometimes people even avoid using names for several minutes because they're hoping the name will magically return to them.
Then there are situations involving unexpected encounters. For example, you might run into an ex-partner while shopping or walking through town. You weren't prepared for the meeting, and suddenly you're trying to decide what to say, how long to stay, and whether the conversation should be friendly or brief.
Unexpected questions can also create awkward moments. Someone might ask about your salary, your relationship status, or your future plans. Even if the person means well, you may not feel comfortable answering. Then you have to find a polite response while managing your own feelings.
This topic is especially important for English learners because awkwardness can feel stronger when you're speaking a second language. Sometimes learners worry that a pause, a grammar mistake, or a misunderstood word will make the conversation strange.
The good news is that awkward conversations are a normal part of communication. They happen in every language and in every culture. Native speakers experience them too. Learning how to handle these moments can make conversations feel less stressful and much more enjoyable.
And that's what we'll explore today. We'll look at why awkward conversations happen, why they affect us so strongly, and how we can deal with them more comfortably when they appear in everyday life.
Since awkward conversations are such a normal part of life, let's talk about some situations where they appear most often. One that comes to mind immediately is when a conversation starts well but slowly loses momentum. At first, both people seem interested, but after a few minutes, the energy begins to fade.
Yes, and then both people start searching for a new topic at the same time. You can almost see the wheels turning in their heads. One person talks about the weather, the other mentions work, and then there's another pause. Neither person knows where to take the conversation next.
I think this happens a lot at social events. You might be standing next to someone you've never met before. You exchange introductions and talk about where you're from. After that, things become less predictable. Some conversations flow naturally, while others feel like you're trying to push a car uphill.
Another classic situation is accidentally interrupting someone. You're excited about a point you want to make, so you start speaking. Then you suddenly realize the other person wasn't finished. You stop, apologize, and tell them to continue, but for a moment, the rhythm of the conversation feels broken.
What's funny is that many interruptions are completely innocent. People aren't trying to be rude, they're simply enthusiastic or eager to contribute. Still, even a small interruption can create a brief moment of discomfort.
Then there are misunderstandings. Someone tells a joke and everyone laughs except you. Now you're wondering whether to ask for an explanation or just smile politely. Sometimes you laugh a second too late because you've finally understood what everyone found funny.
I've seen that happen many times. There are also moments when you hear something incorrectly. A person says one thing, but you think they said something completely different. Your response doesn't match what they meant, and suddenly both people look confused.
Technology creates its own awkward situations too. Video calls are full of them. Two people start speaking at the same moment, both stop, then both start again, then both stop again. It becomes a strange competition to see who will speak first.
That's so true. And sometimes there's a delay in the connection. You think the other person has finished talking, so you respond, but they're still speaking. Nobody did anything wrong, yet the conversation feels awkward for a few seconds.
Workplaces are another source of uncomfortable moments. Imagine joining a meeting late. Everyone is already seated and focused on the discussion. You quietly enter the room, hoping not to attract attention, but somehow every eye turns towards you.
Or imagine sending a message to the wrong person. Maybe you intended it to send to a close friend, but it goes to a coworker instead. The message might not be inappropriate, but it suddenly appears very strange in the wrong context.
That's one reason people often reread messages before sending them. They've experienced enough awkward situations to know that mistakes can happen quickly.
Here's another interesting one. Sometimes people ask questions that seem simple but are difficult to answer. Someone might ask, "What do you enjoy doing?" And your mind suddenly becomes empty. You know you have hobbies and interests, but at that moment, you can't think of a single one.
I know that feeling. The pressure of answering immediately can make even easy questions feel challenging. The more you search for the perfect answer, the harder it becomes.
By the way, we'd love to hear from you. What is the most awkward conversation you've ever experienced? Tell us in the comments section and share what happened.
I think listeners will have some great stories. The reality is that awkward moments appear in schools, workplaces, friendships, family gatherings, and even casual encounters with strangers. They are part of everyday communication. The good news is that these situations don't happen randomly. There are reasons behind them, and understanding those reasons can help us feel much more comfortable when they appear in everyday life.
That raises an interesting question. If awkward moments are so common, why do they affect us so strongly? Why can a small interaction stay in our minds for hours or even days afterwards?
I think a big part of it comes from our desire to be accepted by other people. Most of us want positive social experiences. We want people to like us, respect us, and enjoy talking with us. When something feels awkward, even for a moment, our brains sometimes interpret it as a sign that something went wrong.
That makes sense. Human beings are social creatures. We spend a lot of our lives interacting with family members, friends, coworkers, classmates, and strangers. Because relationships matter to us, conversations matter too. We naturally pay attention to situations that might affect how others see us.
One of the biggest causes of awkward feelings is the fear of being judged. Sometimes we say something and immediately wonder what the other person thinks. Did that sound strange? Was that a silly comment? Did I explain myself clearly? Those questions can appear very quickly.
What's interesting is that the fear often appears before we have any evidence that something is wrong. Someone might simply have a neutral expression on their face, but our minds begin creating stories. We start imagining negative opinions that may not even exist.
I think most people have experienced that. You tell a story and one person doesn't react the way you expected. Maybe they looked distracted or thoughtful. Suddenly, you're wondering whether they disliked the story, even though they may have been thinking about something completely unrelated.
Another factor is our desire to make a good impression. This is especially common when meeting new people. During first conversations, many people pay extra attention to what they say. They want to appear friendly, intelligent, interesting, or professional.
The challenge is that trying too hard can sometimes create additional pressure. When we're constantly monitoring ourselves, conversations become less natural. Instead of listening carefully, we start evaluating every sentence before and after we say it.
That's when overthinking often begins. Have you ever replayed a conversation in your mind long after it ended?
More times than I'd like to admit. Sometimes a conversation lasts 5 minutes, but the analysis lasts an hour. You remember one small comment and start examining it from every possible angle.
The funny thing is that other people are usually not spending nearly as much time thinking about the conversation as we are. While we're reviewing every detail, they've probably moved on with their day.
That's true. Our minds tend to place a spotlight on our own actions. Because we experienced every second of the conversation, it feels important to us. Other people experienced it differently. For them, it may have been one ordinary interaction among many.
Earlier, we mentioned silence. There's also an interesting reason why silence can feel so uncomfortable. When conversations pause unexpectedly, our brains immediately start searching for meaning. We wonder whether something is wrong even when nothing is wrong at all.
And because we're paying close attention during those moments, time seems to slow down. A brief pause can feel much longer than it really is. Later, if someone measured the silence, it might only be a few seconds.
Another thing our brains do is focus heavily on mistakes. Imagine having 10 conversations in one day. 9 go smoothly, and 1 includes a slightly awkward moment. Which conversation are you most likely to remember that evening?
Probably the awkward one. Human beings often notice problems more than successes. Smooth conversations feel normal, so they don't always leave a strong impression. Small mistakes, however, stand out.
That's why people sometimes believe they're worse at conversations than they really are. They're remembering the exceptions rather than the overall pattern.
It's also worth mentioning the difference between normal nervousness and social anxiety. Many people feel nervous before meeting new people, speaking in groups, or attending social events. That's a common human experience.
Social anxiety tends to be more intense and persistent. It can create stronger fears about social situations and make everyday interactions feel much more challenging. Normal nervousness usually comes and goes, while social anxiety can have a larger impact on daily life.
Understanding these mental habits can be helpful because it reminds us that awkward feelings don't always reflect reality. Often they're connected to how our brains interpret situations. Once we recognize that, we can begin viewing awkward moments with a little more perspective and a lot less fear.
Speaking of perspective, I think one of the best ways to understand awkward conversations is through real stories. The good thing about awkward experiences is that they often become funny memories later, even if they feel terrible at the time.
I completely agree. Some of my most embarrassing moments have become some of my favorite stories. They weren't enjoyable when they happened, but looking back now, they're hard not to laugh about.
I have a story that still makes me shake my head. A few years ago, I worked with someone for several months. We saw each other regularly, attended meetings together, and had plenty of conversations. Everything seemed normal until one day I realized I couldn't remember her name.
After several months? That's impressive.
I know. That's what made it worse. At first, I thought the name would come back to me naturally. Usually, if you forget something, your memory returns after a few minutes. But this time, it didn't happen.
So what did you do?
I started avoiding situations where I might need to say her name. If I needed her attention, I would walk over and start speaking without using her name. If I introduced her to someone else, I found creative ways around it.
That sounds stressful.
It became surprisingly stressful. Every day felt like I was protecting a secret. The longer it continued, the more difficult it became to ask. After all, how do you admit that you've forgotten the name of someone you've worked with for months?
That's the trap. The longer you wait, the harder it feels.
One afternoon, I finally accepted reality. I couldn't keep avoiding it forever, so I told her the truth. I said something like, "I have a slightly embarrassing question. Could you remind me how you pronounce your name?" I was hoping to make it sound less obvious.
Clever strategy.
The funny part is that she laughed and admitted that she had forgotten another coworker's name before. I spent days worrying about her reaction, and she wasn't upset at all.
That's often how these stories end. We imagine disaster, but reality is usually much kinder.
What about you? What's one of your memorable awkward moments?
Mine happened in a shopping center. I noticed someone looking in my direction and smiling. Naturally, I assumed the person recognized me. Maybe we'd met somewhere before. Maybe we had a mutual friend.
Dangerous assumption.
Very dangerous, as it turned out. I smiled back and started walking towards him. As I got closer, I greeted him like an old acquaintance. I asked how he had been and started making friendly conversation.
Let me guess. He had no idea who you were.
Not a clue. He looked confused from the first sentence. Then I realized something important. He wasn't smiling at me. He was smiling at someone standing behind me.
Oh no.
Yes. At that point, I wanted to disappear. I quickly apologized and explained the misunderstanding. Thankfully, he was polite about it, but I spent the rest of the day replaying the moment in my head.
That's a classic awkward situation.
Another one happened with a text message. I was discussing plans with a friend and sent a message that included a joke about being late all the time. The problem was that I accidentally sent it to a different person who was also known for arriving late.
That must have looked intentional.
That's what I worried about. Fortunately, after a brief explanation, the misunderstanding was cleared up. Still, those few minutes before receiving a reply felt very long.
I have a smaller story involving an elevator. I entered an elevator with one other person. We smiled politely, and I expected a quiet ride. Then, the elevator stopped between floors for a few moments.
Not long enough to be dangerous, but long enough to be uncomfortable.
Precisely. Neither of us knew whether to continue standing silently or start a conversation. We exchanged several awkward smiles and short comments about the situation. It felt much longer than it probably was.
That reminds me of another common experience, the accidental wave. You see someone in the distance and wave enthusiastically. Then you realize they were greeting the person behind you.
I think almost everyone has experienced that at least once.
The good news is that these stories prove something important. Awkward moments happen to all of us. They don't only happen to shy people, nervous people, or English learners. They're simply part of being human, and sometimes they give us the best stories to tell later.
Those stories highlight something I've always found interesting. Two people can experience the same awkward situation and react in completely different ways. Someone laughs immediately, another person becomes quiet, and someone else pretends nothing happened at all.
That's true. The awkward moment might be identical, but the response can vary a lot. I think personality plays a major role in that. People naturally process social situations in different ways.
One of the most common personality differences people talk about is the difference between extroverts and introverts. Of course, not everyone fits perfectly into one category, but the distinction can still help explain certain reactions.
An extrovert often gains energy from social interaction. They usually enjoy meeting people, joining conversations, and spending time in groups. An introvert may enjoy socializing too, but they often need quiet time afterward to recharge.
What's interesting is that people sometimes assume extroverts never feel awkward. That's definitely not true. Being comfortable around people doesn't make someone immune to uncomfortable moments.
I agree. I've met very outgoing people who can start conversations with strangers effortlessly, but they still experience embarrassment when something unexpected happens. Confidence doesn't eliminate awkwardness.
That's an important point. Sometimes people imagine that confident individuals walk through life without social mistakes. In reality, confident people often experience awkward situations just like everyone else. The difference is that they may recover more quickly.
They might think, well, that was awkward, and then continue with their day. Someone else might spend hours analyzing the same event. If I compare our personalities, Mike, I think you're generally more relaxed during social interactions than I am.
I can see that. I usually don't worry too much during conversations. If something goes wrong, I tend to move forward fairly quickly. What about you?
I think I'm a little more reflective. If I have an unusual conversation, I sometimes revisit it later and wonder whether I could have handled something differently. Not constantly, but enough to notice the habit.
That's interesting because listeners might assume that someone who seems calm never questions themselves afterward.
Nobody is completely free from self-doubt. It just appears in different ways for different people.
Cultural differences can also influence reactions. In some cultures, long pauses during conversations are perfectly normal. In others, people may feel pressure to fill every moment with speech.
That's a great observation. What feels awkward in one place may feel completely ordinary somewhere else. Social expectations vary from culture to culture, and people often learn those expectations from a young age.
That's why travelers sometimes experience confusion. They may interpret a situation through their own cultural habits, while the people around them are following a different set of social rules.
Another thing I've noticed is that laughter is a very common response to awkward situations. Some people laugh when they're embarrassed, even when nothing is particularly funny.
I know people like that. The laughter isn't really about humor. It's more like a release of nervous energy. Their brains are trying to reduce tension.
On the other hand, some people become very quiet. When they feel uncomfortable, they stop talking and observe what's happening around them.
Then there's another group of people who react in the opposite direction. When they become nervous, they start talking much more than usual.
I've seen that happen. Someone feels uncomfortable, so they keep adding details, explanations, and extra comments. The more nervous they become, the more words appear.
Sometimes they even realize they're talking too much while it's happening, but they can't seem to stop.
What's fascinating is that all these reactions are attempts to handle the same feeling. Whether someone laughs, becomes silent, or talks nonstop, they're responding to discomfort in their own way.
And understanding those differences can make us more patient with ourselves and with others. People don't react differently because one approach is right and another is wrong. They react differently because personalities, experiences, and social habits vary from person to person.
After talking about why awkward conversations happen and how different people respond to them, the next question is pretty practical. What can we actually do when these moments appear? We can't eliminate awkward situations completely, but we can handle them in a healthier way.
I think the first step is accepting that awkward moments are normal. Many people make things worse by fighting against reality. They believe every conversation should be smooth and effortless. When something uncomfortable happens, they immediately think they've failed.
That's a great point. If we expect perfection, every small mistake feels enormous. But if we accept that occasional awkwardness is part of communication, those moments lose some of their power.
One thing that helps is remembering that awkward situations are often temporary. A few seconds later, the conversation may be flowing again. The uncomfortable feeling usually doesn't last nearly as long as people expect.
Humor can also be surprisingly useful. I'm not talking about turning every awkward moment into a comedy performance. Sometimes a simple, light-hearted comment can reduce tension and help everyone relax.
Yes, if something slightly embarrassing happens, acknowledging it with a smile can make the situation feel much more comfortable. People often appreciate honesty more than perfection.
Another helpful strategy is asking follow-up questions. Many awkward pauses happen because a topic reaches its natural conclusion. Instead of panicking, you can simply show curiosity about the other person.
For example, if someone mentions a recent trip, you could ask what they enjoyed most about it. If they mention a new hobby, you could ask how they became interested in it. Follow-up questions keep conversations moving naturally.
Let's talk about silence for a moment. We've mentioned that people often become uncomfortable during pauses. One thing I've learned is that silence doesn't automatically mean something is wrong.
I agree. Sometimes people are thinking. Sometimes they're processing information. Sometimes they're deciding what to say next. Not every pause needs to be filled immediately.
That's why it's important not to panic. The moment people panic, they often start speaking without thinking, and then they worry about what they just said.
Staying calm usually leads to better conversations. A short pause is often much less noticeable than we imagine.
Another useful skill is admitting mistakes naturally. Many awkward situations become more uncomfortable because people try to hide what happened.
That's true. Let's use the forgotten name example. Instead of spending weeks avoiding the person's name, it may be easier to say something simple like, "I'm sorry, could you remind me of your name again?" Most people understand.
The same idea applies when interrupting someone. You don't need a long explanation. You can simply say, "Sorry, I interrupted you. Please continue." Then allow them to finish their thought.
Simple responses often work best because they don't create additional attention around the mistake.
What about those moments when a conversation seems to stop completely?
That's where curiosity becomes valuable again. You might ask about something you've already learned about the person. Maybe you ask about their work, a recent project, a favorite activity, or something they mentioned earlier.
And if nothing comes to mind immediately, that's okay too. A brief pause doesn't mean the interaction has failed.
One of the most comforting things to remember is that most people are thinking about themselves more than they're thinking about you. They're wondering how they sound, whether they're making a good impression, and what they should say next.
That's a powerful reminder. We often imagine we're being closely examined, but other people are usually focused on their own experiences and concerns.
When you combine all these ideas together, awkward conversations start to feel much less intimidating. Accept the moment, stay calm, use a little humor when appropriate, show interest in the other person, and don't be afraid to acknowledge small mistakes. Those simple habits can make social interactions feel far more comfortable over time.
As we come to the end of today's conversation, I think the biggest takeaway is simple. Awkward moments are universal. They happen to students, professionals, confident people, shy people, native speakers, and language learners. No one is completely immune to them.
That's right. An awkward conversation doesn't define who you are. It doesn't determine your personality, your intelligence, or your communication skills. It's simply one small moment in a much larger story.
And the good news is that most people forget these moments much faster than we expect. While we're replaying a conversation in our minds, the other person has often moved on to other things.
That's one reason it's helpful to be kind to yourself. Everybody says the wrong thing sometimes, misunderstands a situation, or experiences an uncomfortable pause. It's part of normal human interaction.
In fact, many awkward moments eventually become funny memories. The situations that make us cringe today often become the stories we laugh about months or years later.
For our English learners listening today, don't let the fear of awkward conversations stop you from practicing. Every conversation is an opportunity to learn, grow, and become more confident.
Keep speaking, keep connecting with people, and remember that progress matters far more than perfection.
Thanks for spending this time with us today. We'll see you again in the next conversation.